Good morning, everybody. Today we're going to elaborate more on black economics in terms of the difference between how we were in the 60s compared to how we are now and how we can get back to the health, and wellness of where we are, where we were back in the 60s. So, a few things we need to go over. First thing we need to go over, we're going to have to talk about the 80s. We have to talk about the 80s because we have to understand the effects of drugs and the effects that mind control, or as I talked about in the last video, the book from the Manchurian Candidate, Mind Control, the effect that mind control has over the course of how our health has changed. We're going to talk about the 70s. 70s goes into detail how after the assassination of Martin Luther King, how the effects of integration actually had a negative impact on our economy,
so
the black economy. And
it's important that
we're also going to talk
for
about
this reason particularly
is
why it's
where
important that we have art
that from
the
our
other
culture
because
and the economics of our culture starting to get blocked by various types of gatekeepers, like record labels and black film only pushing a certain narrative, which has an effect on psychological warfare, right? So, first thing we're going to talk about is we're going to look at, we'll look at today's generation, right, as of right now. As a community, our image, our public image is as of right now, it's still going to be what it is in social media. Social media is always going to influence the black image in a negative light, right? This has an effect on our children, and the way to combat this, as I've said in previous times, is through film and art and pushing black film and black art in a positive way and putting us in proper lighting, right? So our problems now today lie within a great division, especially when it comes to poverty-stricken areas. You can see that the health, it's all in the health. The health is down. So this has it's almost like a median. Like the health is almost like a median to the negative, to the culture of these poverty-stricken areas, a culture of self-hate, self-inflicted wounds, and self-inflicted, self-war with each other, right? So this is where we're at in today's generation, along with we are starting to take over social, we're starting to combat media, social media, and or sports media, to be specific. Sports media and the films and the music, right? These things are starting to be combated. And what we need to do is to sort of gravitate towards these movements a little bit, right? So let's talk about the 60s and the 70s, right? So when we look at the 60s, right? Because we're talking about how how we were in the 60s compared to now, and how we can continue to get back to that health that we were at, right? So when we look at the 60s, we can see that we were united, and we were all fighting for one cause. We had various orchestrators who were well orchestrating of the things that well orchestrating of the health and wellness of the people and the economic freedom of the masses of our people, right? So we had health programs. We had plenty of health programs. We weren't divided. We were all in same communities, right? So it was easy to have. We had health programs, all these other various types of programs, food programs for kids of the poor, educational programs, and all these types of things. And these things were easily financed because we were circulating our dollars from within the community, right? So when we got to the 70s was much different because now Dr. Martin Luther King, the economic leader of the black community, was assassinated, right? And now in the 70s, we now we're seeing the effects of integration, right? So the effects of integration is so now our black businesses are starting to have to compete with these white corporate businesses, right? And we're not being able to compete with these black corporate businesses because we're not circulating our dollar anymore. We're spending outside of our community, right? So from spending outside of our community, this decreased our the wealth, the financial wealth and income that we or revenue that we had inside the community. So we weren't able to finance these programs that we used to have in the 60s anymore. Now we weren't able to educate properly anymore. We weren't able to educate our kids, and now there's a disconnect between the child and the parent now, right? Because they're not being properly educated. They're not getting into these programs, and now the parents are at a financial crisis because the job opportunities are starting to lack, and our business capacities are starting to lack as well, right? So with all of these different things going on, this ultimately created a great divide. More people were getting locked up, mass incarceration, and the split of the family was starting to take effect at this time in the 70s. But what really took the downward spiral, right, what really hit the black community was the crack epidemic, was Operation Mind Control, right? So in mind control, they slipped in various types of drugs like LSD and K-Ultra and marijuana and these other types of drugs. And what these drugs did was it caused us to turn from the black community of strength and unity and fighting for one cause against the system, the rigged system, the most terrifying force that America has ever seen, right? So we turned from this into the 80s, where now we're all on drugs, and everything from our community went to sex, drugs, guns, and killing each other, and these types of things, right? So this is where you get your black-on-black crimes. This is where you get your black-on-black hate. All of this stuff really kicked in with the crack epidemic, right? It did a lot of various things. It changed us from. At first, this was white people doing this, right? This is a white culture thing to say that killing a black person isn't murder, raping a black woman isn't rape, and stealing from a black man isn't robbery, right? So this was white culture back in the day, and it's transitioned and turned into black culture now in the day, right? Or just American culture in general, right? Just underneath the surface. So this is what happened in the 80s. So if we take the 80s and we look at the 90s, another thing you have to look at is every generation that we have. Every generation as a black people, right? Every generation that is born, right, evolves to fit their environment, right? That's very important. So in the 90s, as black people, we evolved to fit our environment. By certain black men, we evolved to fit the environment by creating businesses out of our culture, which would involve clothing businesses that would rival N1, the basketball, the basketball events in New York and Brooklyn, and all of these types of things raise a lot of funds and money for the community, right? So these are things that we need to look at as well, because this every time we're faced with it, every time the environment changes, we evolve. So we have to look at how we evolve in each setting, right? To apply to apply all the things that we evolved into the next generation, right? So this is what was going on in the 90s, right? But at the same time, it was still a negative because drugs still had a negative effect on us in the 90s. You know, we had a lot of songs that had mixed messages in them, right? On one end, it would be sex, drugs, and guns. On another end, it would be about politics. It would be about police brutality and politics, right? This is why, right? It's because you have a generation that evolved to fit its environment, right? So this is where you get the mixed stuff. You get mixed messages and stuff, right? So when we look at the 2000s, right? When we look at the 2000s, we see this is where you get your record labels and gentrification and the system is now combating against what we're evolving into, right? With various things, various gatekeeping things, right? So the gentrification, the record labels, and now in sports, they're trying to get more people from overseas, and now there's certain things you can't say in the NBA. You can't say this, you can't say that, and there's certain things you can't do in the NBA publicly anymore, right? As well as the music or art and film, my bad, film, as well as film, right? Film only gets pushed if it pushes a certain message, right? This is throughout your 2000s, right? So now the system has combated what we have with psychological warfare, right? So when we get to the 2010, 2020, 2010, 2020, we're starting to have more of a disconnect now because the disconnect is getting greater and greater from in between the children and the parents, right? And the older generations, right? Because of what they're seeing in the media. From the 2000s, this pushed a whole different narrative of what black should look like. Now, instead of what the black looked like in the 60s, when it was unity and when it was community and when it was economic stability and when it was now our educators, our lawyers, all of this are working in one community, working in one pot. They're all working together, right? You have all of these things working for the same cause. It's like a basketball team. You got the lawyer and the lawyer is probably the 3-point shooter. You got all of these things work together in one pot. But now you don't have that anymore in the 2010s and 2020s because of the 2000s and the disconnect that they made by psychological warfare. What they did with what they exposed in the imagery, right? From our music and the entertainment of movies and TV shows, and these types of things were combated against right here, right? So now what the kids have seen in the 2000s have started to have a massive effect on the 2010s and 2020s, right? So now people are having babies at a much younger age, right? Kids are getting locked up having guns and all of these types of things because of what they saw and the influences that they're modeling, right? So this is the great divide that we see right here from in between the 2020, right, and 2024, and this age from back then, right? So the way to get back to what we were doing in the 60s is by first closing this gap, right? We have to close this gap, and we have to start re-educating this age group, our children in this younger age group, right? So this is a space where we have to learn about the 60s. We have to learn about the 30s, the 40s, the 20s, what was going on during these times in the Civil War and Reconstruction, because at the end of the day, these are psychological things that are in our DNA, right? Because our grandparents, our great grandparents, our great great grandparents went through these things. So it's like we have to understand that um, physical things, physical genetics aren't the only things passed down when it from generation. Psychological things are passed down. Psychological traumas are passed down, right? And are brought forth to light. So if we don't bring these things forth and we don't understand our grandparents, our great grandparents, we're not really understanding ourselves fully, which comes back and bite us in the back, right? These are things that happen a lot, and people get classified as mentally unhealthy, or it gets classified as mental health. But really, what it is, it's the fact that they're not understanding themselves, and society every single year, by every single decade, gets more and more and more catered against the black community. What I mean by that is LGBTQ community, for example, right? Not to throw shade at them for teaching purposes, I'm saying the LGBTQ community is a community that was this is frowned upon in the black community, right? Your ancestors frowned upon this, right? And this has been psychologically passed down genetically to you. So now you have to conform to it, but you don't really you don't really understand how it's affecting you because you don't know. You have to, because you're not aware that it's psychologically affecting you, right? So it's things like this and the things that we're conforming to in this generation. Not to throw shade at LGBTQ, but that's just one thing of many different things that we have to be weary of, because these things are going against us subconsciously. We're fighting against ourselves, right? And not even knowing it. So we have to unpack these things and know more about ourselves and more about these generations, right? So that's the number one thing, right? And the number two thing is we have to understand what they did that worked, right? What were the things that they implemented that worked for them, right? And what worked for them, is we can see that the programs were working, right? The programs, educational programs, the food, feeding the poor, when they were united and not divided, right? And we understood, and we can understand that when these things were in place, this brought about a better health within our community, right? When we had these things. So when we look at the 70s, right? The 70s was where we now see the effects of integration, right? Not being economically literate, right? So now all of these different things we're not spending within our community anymore, right? So let's look at it. When we stop spending outside of our community, we lost most of the programs that we had, right? Because we couldn't refinance it. We lost job opportunities because our business capacity started to fade, right? So, and we lost connection to our youth because we couldn't finance the right programs and institutions to get the youth into. So with these different things, this is what's missing, right? This is what's missing, and what's also missing is the connection the youth have to their ancestors, like their grandparents, their great-grandparents, and things like this, right? So the more we start to unpack and go back and know about ourselves, right, the more we can understand ourselves and why we do the things we do, the certain things that are frowned upon in this day's society, right? So this is the key to changing our generation. This is the key to unlocking, right, new revenues, new openings where we can actually start implementing and modernizing ourselves, because the white community is modernizing, Asians are modernized. They all are modernizing and doing these things, but it's hard for us to modernize when we don't have a very solid rooted connection to ourselves, because ourselves, is very frowned upon in society. All right, So it's about unpacking these things and just learning more about these things, right? What they really are, what they really mean, so that way we can implement them and modernize them, right? Modernize them, like I've said in previous videos, it would mean going to the cartoons, right? Americans got cartoons, Japanese got animes. We need to create our own cartoons that our youth and people that watch cartoons can watch instead of watching these other cartoons, right? There has to be obviously TV shows that we have in the media that we're that we have, right? That are really good, right? We need to have more of them. Swagger is my favorite. Swagger is my favorite TV series. I feel like they did that perfectly because the thing about our TV series that we make, they can't be like these other TV series because TV series have a tendency to take from us. TV series and movies and things that we watch should put back into us, should connect to our human emotions and to connect to our purpose and what we're doing. Like Black Panther. Black Panther was a movie. I didn't sit down and watch Black Panther and felt drained. When I sat down and watched Black Panther, I got after that movie, I feel like I wanted to do something. I feel like I wanted to better society, right? This is the things that we should be creating in our film, right? But I'm not gonna ramble on too much longer of that because I don't want to get too far off topic, right? So the topic of the matter is still like how can we get our generation now in 2024 to connect back to these time periods of back then, right? Appreciate y'all for tuning in. Stay healthy, stay motivated, y'all, and we gonna get educated. I holla.